In 2018, Detective Rachel Monroe had already spent more than a decade wearing the badge. Phoenix was her city, a sunburnt maze of streets she knew by instinct, a place where the desert heat never really cooled, even at night. Colleagues respected her. Supervisors trusted her. She was sharp, methodical, and steady under pressure. But when the day ended and the lights of the precinct dimmed, Rachel always drove home alone. She didn't mind the solitude. At least, that's what she told herself. Her apartment was quiet, decorated with case files stacked on the kitchen counter and a single framed photo of her academy graduation. She'd been engaged once, years ago, but the relationship ended under the weight of long hours, missed birthdays, and the cold exhaustion that comes from seeing too much human cruelty. Since then, Rachel had built walls around her heart. It was easier to focus on the job. That year, the department paired her with someone new, Officer Dana Collins, a bright, driven 30-year-old who'd recently transferred from patrol to investigations. Dana was everything Rachel wasn't: outgoing, eager, full of optimism about making a difference. She had an energy that could fill an entire room. The first day they met, Dana flashed a grin and said, "You and me, partner. We're going to be the dream team." Rachel had smiled back politely, unconvinced. She'd trained plenty of rookies before, and most burned out before their first major case. But as the weeks went on, Dana surprised her. She asked smart questions. She stayed calm at crime scenes. And she had a kind of empathy Rachel had long since lost. Dana could comfort victims' families in a way that reminded Rachel of what compassion looked like before the job hardened it. Soon, they were working side by side on everything from break-ins to assault cases. Rachel found herself respecting the younger woman's instincts, even admiring her tenacity. Dana had a way of noticing the details others missed. A coffee cup move an inch, a witness's shifting tone. They balanced each other. Rachel was logic and procedure. Dana was intuition and heart. Together, they solved cases that other pairs couldn't crack. During late nights at the precinct, they'd share takeout in the break room, swapping stories about the worst arrests or the funniest perps. Dana talked a lot about her husband, Evan, a cybersecurity expert she'd met in college. "He's the calm to my chaos," she'd laugh. "Keeps me from losing it when I'm on double shifts." Rachel would nod, half listening, half wondering what that kind of stability felt like. The bond between them grew naturally, built on mutual trust forged in danger. Rachel started to care, not just as a colleague, but as a friend. She'd catch herself waiting for Dana's voice over the radio during tense calls, that small reassurance that her partner was safe. To the rest of the department, they were one of the most reliable teams on the force. To Rachel, it finally felt like she'd found balance, a partner she could depend on, someone who understood the weight of the badge without needing words. But beneath that quiet sense of belonging, a small, unfamiliar emptiness lingered. It wasn't about friendship. It was about something she couldn't name yet, something that would soon twist that bond into something far darker. By October 2018, the partnership between Detective Rachel Monroe and Officer Dana Collins had become something solid, almost effortless. They worked crime scenes like a rhythm, communicating through glances and subtle nods, finishing each other's sentences when briefing their lieutenant. After a tough week closing a burglary case, Dana suggested something simple. "You should come over for dinner. Evan's been dying to meet you." Rachel hesitated. She wasn't used to socializing outside of work. Her world revolved around shift schedules, case files, and black coffee. Still, there was something warm in Dana's tone, something genuine. Against her better judgment, Rachel agreed. That Friday night, she drove to the quiet suburban streets of Scottsdale, Arizona, where Collins' home sat beneath the soft orange glow of streetlights. It was a tidy, middle-class neighborhood. Trim lawns, Halloween decorations already up, and the faint smell of barbecue drifting through the air. When Dana opened the door, barefoot and smiling, Rachel felt oddly out of place, like a guest in a life she'd never known. Inside, the house was cozy, filled with framed wedding photos and soft jazz playing from a Bluetooth speaker. The air smelled of rosemary chicken and fresh bread. Dana moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, laughing as she poured wine. "Evan's running late from work," she said. "You like him. He's kind of nerd, but the good kind." When the front door opened a few minutes later, Rachel looked up, and time seemed to pause. Evan Collins was not what she expected. He wasn't particularly tall or flashy, but there was a quiet confidence about him, a steady presence that instantly drew attention. He had calm eyes, a deep, even voice, and the kind of composure that made everything around him slow down. He extended his hand. "You must be Rachel. Dana talks about you all the time." She laughed politely, but inside, something flickered, an unfamiliar warmth that made her uncomfortable. Dinner flowed easily. The three of them shared stories about work, the absurd calls, the strange suspects. Evan had a sharp wit that made even Rachel laugh, something she hadn't done in weeks. She noticed how attentively he listened, how he leaned forward when she spoke, genuinely interested in her stories from the field. He asked questions Dana never had, about the psychology of suspects, about the toll the job took. At one point, Dana left the table to grab dessert, and the room went still. Evan and Rachel exchanged a glance, too long to be casual, too short to be innocent. The silence carried weight, the kind that hums just beneath polite conversation. When Dana returned, the moment vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Later, as Rachel stood by the door preparing to leave, Evan thanked her for coming. The porch light glowed amber against the cool night air. He smiled softly. "Dana's lucky to have you as a partner. Not everyone would watch her back the way you do." Rachel nodded, unable to find the right words. Her chest tightened with something she didn't want to name. Driving home, the streets blurred past her. She told herself it was nothing, a passing thought, a fleeting moment of connection. But deep down, she knew better. That dinner had changed something. And from that night on, she would never look at her partner, or her partner's husband, the same way again. In the weeks after that dinner, something unspoken lingered between Rachel Monroe and Evan Collins. It wasn't visible. Not to Dana, not to anyone, but it pulsed quietly beneath every text, every phone call, every chance encounter that followed. It started innocently enough. Dana would mention that Evan could help with a few technical issues on a cybercrime case, and Rachel would agree to reach out. The first few calls were strictly professional, discussions about data encryption, network traces, and system logs. But after the third call, the tone began to shift. Evan started asking about her cases, not just the files, but how she felt about them. "How do you deal with it?" he'd ask one night, his voice low over the phone. "All the darkness you see every day." Rachel paused, caught off guard. Most people didn't ask questions like that. She answered honestly, maybe too honestly. "You don't deal with it," she said quietly. "You just learn to live numb." There was a silence on the line, then a soft exhale. "You sound lonely," Evan said. She didn't respond, but he wasn't wrong. From then on, the conversations came more often. Sometimes Dana was home, sometimes she wasn't. Rachel would hear her partner's voice in the background during a call and feel a pang of guilt, but she couldn't stop. Each conversation with Evan felt like oxygen after years of holding her breath. They began exchanging texts, memes, jokes, quotes from old detective movies. But gradually, the messages deepened. He told her about the pressure of his job, the late nights managing cybersecurity breaches, how he and Dana had grown distant since she joined the detective unit. "She's always exhausted," he confided. "It's like we live in the same house, but in two different worlds." Rachel told herself she was just being a good friend. That's what partners do. They look out for each other's families. But the way her heart raced every time his name lit up her phone told a different story. One night, after a particularly long shift, Rachel stopped by Evan's office to drop off some files for an ongoing case. Dana was working late. The office was dimly lit, monitors glowing in soft blue. Evan thanked her and offered coffee. They sat in silence for a moment, both aware of the electricity in the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You ever feel like you met the right person at the wrong time?" Rachel's breath caught. It was the kind of question that wasn't meant to be answered. But in that instant, something cracked inside her. From that night forward, they crossed an invisible line. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally. They began sharing things they shouldn't have. Hopes, disappointments, pieces of themselves reserved for lovers, not strangers. Evan would text her late at night. "Can't sleep. You awake?" And Rachel would answer every time. They started calling each other during commutes, laughing about trivial things, talking about everything except the one truth they both knew. Meanwhile, Dana remained blissfully unaware. She still smiled at work, still thanked Rachel for being like family. Each word felt like a knife twisting in Rachel's chest. The guilt came in waves. Some nights, she'd stare at her phone, fighting the urge to block his number, to end whatever this was before it destroyed them both. But she never did. She told herself it wasn't wrong. They hadn't done anything. But deep down, she knew better. Emotional affairs don't need physical contact to burn lives to the ground. And for Rachel Monroe, that spark had already been lit. By early 2019, Detective Rachel Monroe was no longer the same woman she'd been just months earlier. The quiet, composed officer known for keeping her emotions in check now found herself consumed by something she couldn't control. Every time she saw Dana Collins smiling, every time she heard her partner talk about a weekend with Evan, something in Rachel's chest twisted painfully. It wasn't jealousy at first. It was longing, she told herself. But longing soon turned into obsession. Rachel began noticing things that didn't matter before. The way Dana's phone would light up with a message from Evan, and she'd smile unconsciously. The way she'd mention how he made her coffee before her shift. The way she'd talk about him in the same breath she used to describe her work. Rachel's mind started spinning stories out of nothing, each one feeding the belief that she and Evan shared a connection that Dana didn't deserve to interrupt. At the precinct, she grew quieter, withdrawn. The officers who used to share jokes with her started keeping their distance. Rachel brushed it off as fatigue, but inside, the jealousy burned hotter each day. The only time she felt peace was when she was alone with Evan. Their conversations had grown deeper, more personal, sometimes dangerously intimate. He'd tell her how he missed being understood, how the distance between him and Dana felt like a wall he couldn't break. Rachel would listen, heart pounding, her thoughts whispering, "It's because she doesn't see you like I do." She began to imagine what it would be like if Dana weren't in the picture, how simple everything would become. The thought came like a thief, slipping into her mind during quiet moments, and it terrified her, but it also stayed. At night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She'd replay every interaction between Dana and Evan in her head, dissecting every word, every look. What started as guilt began to mutate into anger. She convinced herself that Dana didn't truly appreciate Evan, that she took him for granted, while Rachel was the one who actually understood him. The shift from envy to resentment happened quietly. During patrols, she started snapping at Dana over minor mistakes, criticizing her judgment, masking her hostility as professional concern. Dana noticed but brushed it off, thinking her partner was just under stress. One evening, after finishing paperwork, Dana laughed about how she and Evan were planning a weekend trip to Sedona. Rachel smiled back, but something in her eyes went cold. That night, she drove aimlessly through the city, hands gripping the wheel, her mind spiraling. The image of Dana laughing, touching Evan's arm, leaning against him, it looped endlessly. By the time she parked outside her apartment, a dark thought had taken shape. One that made her pulse quicken and her stomach turn. What if she didn't have to live in the shadow of her partner anymore? What if fate or circumstance or an accident could make things right? Rachel tried to dismiss it. She was a cop. She'd seen what murder looked like. Chaotic, cruel, final. But her mind kept finding ways to justify the idea. Cops died in the line of duty all the time. Accidents happened. Shots went astray. Sometimes, life gave you opportunities that looked like tragedies to everyone else. By spring, Rachel's internal war had only one outcome. The guilt had dulled, replaced by grim determination. She began paying closer attention to Dana's habits. Her reflexes during field operations, her angles of approach, the kind of cover she took during raids. She told herself she wasn't planning anything. She was just noticing. But deep down, Rachel Monroe knew exactly what she was preparing for. And once that kind of thought takes root, there's no going back. It was a kind of call every officer dreaded, the kind that started with dispatcher's clipped voice and ended in chaos. On the night of March 15th, 2020, Detective Rachel Monroe and Officer Dana Collins were dispatched to a convenience store robbery in a quiet Phoenix suburb. The suspect was reportedly armed and holding a clerk hostage. To the average officer, it was a nightmare. But to Rachel, it felt like opportunity. She had spent weeks rehearsing this in her mind. Not the details, but the feeling, the confusion, the gunfire, the plausible deniability. She didn't have a written plan. She didn't need one. Years on the force had taught her how investigations worked, how easily a tragedy could hide the truth. When she pulled up beside Dana's patrol SUV, the air outside was thick and warm, the neon sign of the store flickering in the darkness. Dana looked determined, focused as always. "Let's do this by the book," she said, racking her weapon. "We keep each other in sight." Rachel nodded, her heart hammering against her vest. Inside the store, the suspect, a man in his late 20s, had barricaded himself behind the counter, shouting demands at the terrified clerk. The aisles were narrow, stacked high with snacks and soda, making it nearly impossible to see clearly. Dana crouched low, gun drawn, scanning the space ahead. Rachel moved behind her, eyes fixed not on the suspect, but on Dana's back. The moment stretched. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. The suspect yelled something unintelligible. Dana took a step forward, then another, and that was when Rachel saw her chance. It happened in less than 2 seconds. A breath, a decision, a pull of the trigger. The gunshot exploded to the narrow aisle, deafening and final. Dana jolted forward, stumbling, confusion flashing across her face before her body hit the cold tile floor. Rachel didn't hesitate. She swung her weapon toward the suspect and fired 2 more shots, one deliberately wide, the other striking a shelf near him. The man panicked, firing back wildly. The noise became chaos. Glass shattered, cans rolled off shelves, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the room. When it was over, Rachel was the only one standing. She rushed to Dana's side, calling into her radio with the perfect mix of urgency and fear. "Officer down. Shots fired. Suspect neutralized. I need backup and medics now." Her voice trembled just enough to sound real. Her hands pressed against Dana's wound, though deep down, she knew there was nothing to save. Blood pooled under her palms, warm and sticky. Dana's eyes fluttered once, confusion, betrayal, then nothing. Within minutes, sirens flooded the parking lot. Officers stormed the scene, securing the suspect and pulling Rachel to her feet. She was shaking, her face pale, her voice breaking as she described the ambush. No one doubted her. To them, she was a survivor, a partner who had just watched a friend die in the line of duty. Rachel repeated her statement again and again, the same calm precision she used to write reports. The story made perfect sense. Dana had stepped into the open. The suspect had fired. Rachel had returned fire, but the chaos had cost him everything. By the time the coroner arrived, Rachel stood outside the tape line, watching the flashing red and blue lights dance across the pavement. Her heart was steady now. She'd done it. To everyone else, it was a tragedy. To Rachel, it was justice, in her own twisted logic. The obstacle was gone. The life she'd imagined with Evan was now possible. As the medics zipped the body bag shut, Rachel whispered under her breath, "Goodbye, partner." And for the first time in months, she smiled. The morning after the shooting, the city of Phoenix woke to headlines calling Officer Dana Collins a hero. The department released a brief statement. Detective Monroe and Officer Collins responded bravely to an armed robbery. Officer Collins tragically lost her life in the line of duty. Inside the precinct, photos of Dana in uniform were framed and placed beside flowers and candles. Officers stood in silence during roll call, the weight of loss pressing on every chest. And standing at the front, face pale, eyes red, was Detective Rachel Monroe, the grieving partner. She played the role perfectly. Her speech was soft, trembling. "Dana wasn't just my partner," she told the gathered officers. "She was my sister in blue." Tears filled her eyes at the right moments. She hugged her captain, comforted Dana's parents at the funeral, and stood by Evan Collins like a loyal friend who'd lost everything too. To the outside world, Rachel was broken. Inside, she was eerily calm. The funeral drew hundreds, Officers, reporters, neighbors, people who didn't even know Dana. The folded flag, the bagpipes, the salute, it was all theater now. Rachel stood beside Evan as the final notes faded into silence. He could barely stand. When the service ended, he gripped her hand and whispered, "I don't know how to do this without her." Rachel looked into his tear-streaked face and said softly, "You don't have to do it alone." In the weeks that followed, they spoke constantly. Rachel stopped by to check on him, bringing takeout, helping with paperwork, sitting quietly on his couch while he stared at nothing. To anyone else, she was simply supporting a grieving widower. But in her mind, this was the next chapter, the one she'd imagined all along. The two of them together, bound by tragedy. At the department, though, not everyone was convinced by her grief. Small cracks began to appear. The Internal Affairs Division reviewed every officer-involved shooting as standard procedure. At first, Rachel's report matched the witness accounts. Mostly chaos and confusion. But one forensic analyst noticed something off. The trajectory of the bullet that killed Dana didn't align with where the suspect had been standing. It came from an angle slightly behind her. The discrepancy was small, easy to overlook. Still, it was flagged for review. Then came the surveillance footage from a neighboring store, grainy but revealing. It didn't show the shooting itself, but it captured Rachel's movements seconds before it happened. She appeared to reposition herself, stepping slightly to the right, almost aligning behind Dana. It wasn't proof, but it was strange. When detectives brought it up, Rachel brushed it off. "You ever been in a firefight?" she snapped. "You move where you can survive." Her tone ended the conversation, for now. But the whispers began. In the locker room, at the coffee station, in low voices across the bullpen. "She's holding up too well. You'd think she'd be more shaken. Something about that night doesn't add up." Rachel could feel it. The eyes, the quiet looks that lingered too long. Still, she smiled, filed her reports, and kept visiting Evan, who clung to her presence like a lifeline. The department called it tragedy. But for a few detectives, tragedy didn't explain everything. And soon, neither would Rachel. By early April 2020, the whispers inside the Phoenix Police Department had grown too loud to ignore. What began as quiet unease had turned into open suspicion. The ballistics team had finished its final report, and the findings didn't lie. The fatal shot that killed Officer Dana Collins hadn't come from the suspect position near the front counter. It had come from behind. That meant one thing. Someone else had fired that bullet. The Department Internal Affairs Division summoned Detective Rachel Monroe for what they called a routine follow-up interview. Rachel knew something was off the moment she stepped into the small, windowless room. Two senior investigators were already waiting, Detective Harold Stokes and Sergeant Valerie Ruiz. A recorder sat on the table between them, its red light glowing steadily. "Have a seat, Detective." Ruiz said evenly, "We just need to clarify a few things about the shooting." Rachel's pulse ticked faster, but her face stayed calm. She'd been through interrogations before. On the other side of the table, she knew the psychology of it. Silence, repetition, pressure. She wouldn't break. They started simple. Timelines, angles, what she remembered hearing. Rachel recited her report word for word, voice steady. Stokes nodded occasionally, jotting notes. Then he clicked a remote, and the surveillance footage flickered onto the screen. "According to your statement," Ruiz said, "you were positioned directly behind Officer Collins when the suspect opened fire." Rachel nodded. "That's correct." Ruiz paused the video. The grainy image showed Rachel moving to the right, just seconds before the gunfire began. "So why does this show you stepping out of formation?" Rachel leaned forward. "Because I was trying to get a better visual on the suspect. I didn't want crossfire." Stokes studied her, his tone casual but probing. "Thing is, the bullet that killed Officer Collins came from a lower trajectory, consistent with someone standing where you were, not where the suspect was." The silence that followed was suffocating. Rachel felt the air thicken, her throat dry. She forced a laugh that sounded brittle. "That's impossible. You think I shot my own partner?" Neither detective answered. Ruiz slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, the ballistic diagrams, the wound path, the shell casing positions. The evidence spoke for itself. For the first time, Rachel's composure cracked. Her fingers twitched, tapping lightly on the table. "You have no idea what you're suggesting," she said, her voice trembling between anger and fear. But they did. Within hours, Detective Rachel Monroe was read her rights and placed under arrest for first-degree murder. The department that had once praised her now watched in disbelief as she was led out of headquarters in handcuffs, her badge stripped from her chest. The trial began the following spring. The courtroom was packed. Officers, reporters, and a grieving husband sitting stone-faced in the front row. Evan Collins hadn't missed a single hearing. He wanted answers, even if they broke him. Prosecutors laid out a chilling narrative. A decorated detective who fell for her partner's husband, allowed jealousy to fester, and used her training to stage a perfect killing. They showed text records between Rachel and Evan, her sudden behavioral changes, and forensic proof that pointed directly to her gun. Witnesses described how her grief seemed performed. Others recalled her growing tension with Dana in the weeks before the shooting. Piece by piece, the image of a respected officer crumbled into that of a manipulative killer. When it was her turn to testify, Rachel tried to hold the jury's gaze. Her voice cracked as she said, "I love them both. I would never hurt her." But even she didn't sound convinced. After 2 days of deliberation, the verdict came, guilty of first-degree murder. Rachel Monroe showed no visible reaction as the sentence was read, life imprisonment without parole. But when she was escorted out, her eyes met Evan's one final time. His expression wasn't anger. It was emptiness, a hollow stare that told her she destroyed not just one life, but two. As the courtroom doors closed behind her, Rachel finally understood the truth she'd buried beneath obsession. She hadn't lost Dana to jealousy. She'd lost herself long before the first bullet ever left her gun. The gavel came down with a heavy thud that seemed to echo forever. Life without the possibility of parole. That was how the story of Detective Rachel Monroe ended in the eyes of the law. But outside the courtroom, the real story, the emotional wreckage, the quiet aftermath, was only beginning. Rachel was transferred to Perryville Women's Correctional Facility on a hot June morning. The desert outside Phoenix stretched endlessly, a reminder of the life she would never return to. The uniform was no longer blue. It was orange. The badge was gone, replaced by a small number printed above her chest. In her first weeks behind bars, Rachel barely spoke. The other inmates avoided her first. No one quite knew what to make of the cop who killed her partner. Some saw her as a traitor. Others saw her as a broken woman. At night, when the noise of the cell block finally quieted, she would stare at the ceiling and replay everything. The dinner, the stolen glances, the phone calls, the obsession, and that single fatal pull the trigger. The memory of Dana Collins, her laugh, her trust, the way she called her partner, haunted Rachel more than any prison walls ever could. She tried to justify it to herself, whispering in the dark that it had been love, that she had lost control because she wanted something real. But love doesn't come wrapped in blood and guilt. Love doesn't echo like a gunshot you can't take back. Some nights she wrote letters to Evan, to Dana's parents, even to the department. She never sent them. The words always ended up the same way. "I didn't mean to. I just couldn't stop." Outside those walls, Phoenix moved on. The police department held another memorial that fall, this time without fanfare. The framed photo of Dana Collins stayed on the wall in the hallway near the locker rooms, a silent reminder of what obsession disguised as devotion could destroy. New recruits passed by it every day. Their instructors would sometimes pause and tell the story, not in full detail, but enough. "She was one of ours." They'd say, "She was betrayed by one of ours." The department also created a new internal program called Officer Wellness and Boundaries, a direct response to the tragedy. It focused on emotional health, trauma, and ethical relationships. Every class started with a slide showing two women smiling in uniform, Detective Monroe and Officer Collins, 2019. As for Evan Collins, he disappeared from the public eye after the trial. The house in Scottsdale went up for sale 2 months later. Neighbors said he packed his things quietly, left one night before dawn, and never came back. Some reports place him in Portland, Oregon, working remotely in cybersecurity under a different company name. Others said he lived alone, volunteering at a local shelter once a week. What everyone agreed on was that he never remarried, and he never spoke about Phoenix. In one rare interview, 2 years after the verdict, a journalist asked him what justice felt like. He paused for a long time before saying, "Justice doesn't bring anyone back. It just stops the bleeding." Inside prison, Rachel aged quickly. By her 5th year, the dark hair that once peeked from under her police cap had streaks of gray. She kept mostly to herself, working in a library, organizing files, sometimes mentoring younger inmates who reminded her of herself, ambitious, angry, lost. But no matter how many days passed, she couldn't escape the echo of the word partner. It was there in the shuffle of footsteps during head count, in the clang of metal doors, in every sleepless night where guilt replaced oxygen. She'd catch a reflection in the polished window and barely recognize the woman staring back. Once, she had believed she could control her story, manipulate fate, rewrite the rules. Now, her story was written on cold paper and filed in a case archive marked closed. 10 years later, a documentary crew from a true crime network requested an interview. Rachel declined at first, then changed her mind. She sat under the harsh prison lights, hands folded, her voice low and steady. "They'll say I killed my partner because I was jealous," she said. And maybe that's true, but jealousy isn't born overnight. It grows out of loneliness, out of silence. I forgot who I was supposed to be. I thought love could excuse anything. Turns out, it can't excuse murder. The interviewer asked if she regretted it. Rachel looked away for a long time before answering. "I regret that I ever let myself believe I deserve him more than she did." That line would become the closing quote of the documentary Betrayal in Blue, released the following year, a title that captured what Rachel's life had become, a cautionary tale whispered among cops, a story of how even those sworn to protect could destroy from within. Today, the old convenience store where it all happened is gone, torn down, replaced by a small gas station. Few people remember what occurred there on that March night. But for those who do, the story of Rachel Monroe and Dana Collins stands as one of the most haunting betrayals in law enforcement history. And somewhere in the Arizona desert, as the sun bleeds red over the horizon, a woman in an orange uniform sits behind barbed wire, staring toward the west. She doesn't cry anymore. She doesn't speak much, either. Because when you've taken everything that love has to give and twisted it into loss, there are no words left, only silence